Yeah, we'll be good. Let's get started. Nino will hop in when he can. There we go. There we're good. Okay, sweet. This is the College Recruiting Podcast, delivering expertise and value to the player, parent, and coach. I'm very excited about the contrast that we have in this week's episode. While Lucas figures out his technical details there, Stu, why don't you introduce yourself? And while you introduce yourself, please give enlighten the audience on your expertise. And then also, since this is a college recruiting podcast, tell the story of how you ended up at the school that you went to, because everybody's got a different one. And I think people are always surprised at how kind of random it ends up being. So please share it.
Definitely. So my name's Trevor Stewart. I'm the head baseball coach at Horizon High School here in Thornton, Colorado. It is year 18 coaching baseball for me. I've played at all three levels. Went to Garden City Community College, went to the University of Iowa, and then finished up playing at Colorado Mesa. It was one of those things that, and we'll probably talk about it during this podcast, but I was a basketball player and a baseball player growing up. It was kind of funny because every college baseball coach, I was a left-handed pitcher. Every college baseball coach that called me to talk recruiting, I told them every single time that I'm going to go play college basketball. So I ended up signing, going to play junior college the week after my high school graduation. So that would have been last week of May, 1st of June is when I, you know, committed or whatever to go to junior college. Played 2 years at Garden City. Had an assistant coach come and watch another player in a game we were playing at Dodge City Community College, and ended up having a pretty decent outing, and ended up signing and going and playing at the University of Iowa after junior college. Was at Iowa for a year, learned a lot. Travis Wyckoff was my pitching coach there. He was an All-American at Wichita State, so I learned a lot from him. He was a left-handed pitcher, and then things kind of, I was a bullpen guy, wanted to be a starting pitcher. So ended up transferring out of Iowa to Colorado Mesa. It was Mesa State College back in the day. So ended up going and throwing a bullpen for Coach Hanks on my way to go play summer baseball in Lake Havasu for the summer. Through a bullpen. He faxed me the letter of intent and ended up going and playing at Colorado Mesa. But it was kind of fun being able to go junior college to D1, experiencing that, and then going and playing at a top ranked program at Colorado Mesa. So
They had an unbelievable year. Are they still playing? Right?
no, they got knocked out this past weekend against UT Tyler. Yeah, it came down to pitching. Crazy that we're talking about that tonight because it came down to the pitching. So that offense is crazy.
They were something like 50-6. I saw. I think it
Yeah,
was.
they finished 53 wins, tied a school record, 7 losses, second year in a row that UT Tyler beat them to go to the D2 World Series. So,
Budding rivalry,
yeah,
then I would say.
it is. It's starting. It's starting.
Mr. Vargas, Luke,
Yeah.
please, my man, give us your
Yeah.
background.
Yeah. For me, I grew up in Colorado, and then I ended up going to Augustana College, which is a Division III out in Illinois. I was out there from 2017 to 2018, and then I came back and I played 2 years of collegiate summer ball here in Colorado, and I got a chance to work with Greg Golson, and it was a good time kind of hitting with him and while he was preparing for his last couple years of ball, and I was doing the same for me, and we kind of just were bouncing ideas off of each other those 2 summers. So it was a blast. And then after I decided to finally hang up the cleats, Mike Fiskets down south asked me what I was going to be doing. And I was like, well, I kind of want to get into coaching a little bit. And we talked about it. And I went down and I visited with him and I started coaching at Slammers and at the end of 2019. And then I've been there for the last 6 years. And now I'm the youth hitting coordinator on, the youth side of things. And we got a group of sophomores going into their junior year right now. And just enjoying the journey a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I always enjoy watching you work in the cage, and we'll get into it a little bit in the Q&A with you. But this particular episode is intended to be for that 13 to 16-year-old age group trying to make that jump into college. Most of our other episodes have been specifically catered for like the juniors and seniors that are in the hot seat right now. I'd like to in this episode work and focus on that age group that you work with, and you have an unbelievable passion for kids, great knowledge, and it's great to watch you work with that age group that are right on that cusp of making making that jump and to be college ready. Nino, I see you. You made it with us. Thank you. You never stopped coaching. What do we got? Dog? We working on dogs over there on the side? Is that what we got?
Yeah, yeah, working on dogs.
Uh, all right, man. Let's get into it. Trevor, you've watched hundreds of young pitchers come through your program through the years, and worked with hundreds of pitchers. In your experience, what does it actually mean to have fastball command, and why do so many pitchers think they have it when they don't?
It's kind of crazy. We talk about it as a coaching staff at Horizon quite a bit. Almost like the most simple thing when it comes to throwing a baseball is almost a lost art nowadays, when it comes down to like catch play. I think, I think the biggest thing with younger kids is, you want them to be athletic. You gotta move correctly in order, especially when it comes to pitching and pitching mechanics. You want these kids to be athletic and be able to move in an athletic way. I mean, that's the only way to, really get your arm moving and stuff like that. But I think you really establish it, through catch play, having a solid throwing partner, making it fun, making it competitive, playing games within that. I know that, we do quite a bit of things where, we play games like 21, right? Where if it's a throw that is up, around the face area, it's worth 3 points, chest is two, belt is one, and you play a game to 21. I think that, allows the younger kids to, kind of compete, have fun in a game sense and build that fastball command without them having to like think too hard about trying to throw the ball to a different spot or something like that, but I think it always boils down to, catch play and being able to throw the fastball first. I mean, I think when these young kids growing up, I was probably the same watching TV, watching these guys pitch, on television and stuff. You see them throw a fastball, curveball, changeup, splitty, all these different things. And, you go out to a field and it's fun for kids, to be able to try to throw all these different pitches, but pitching starts with a fastball and everything is thrown off of that, so I think it's, catch plays huge and it's almost a lost art nowadays, with everybody, trying to throw as hard as you can and chasing velocity and all that kind of stuff. We lose sight of, being able to throw a baseball where you're at in that year, that moment, and not trying to like get outside of your physical abilities and, and at your age. Shoot, when I was young, when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I probably couldn't even break glass. 13, couldn't even break glass. 14, probably the same. It was all fastball, changeup. It was pretty much fastball, gravity ball, right? And then you kind of start maturing and getting stronger and developing a little bit. And I mean, velocity caught me after my, between my sophomore and junior year, so it was just one of those things where, you played catch, you tried to be accurate, throw it to the base. If you're playing a position, throw it to the base accurately, throw it chest high. You're just focusing on those sorts of things. And it was always four seam grip, fill for seams, four seam grip. It was never two seam. It was always four seam, you know, filling the seams right across your two fingers, right? Not sitting there throwing a ball and, trying to just grip it however. It was always across the seams and throwing four seam fastballs whenever you grabbed a baseball to throw it.
So if I'm hearing you right, the way that you gained command was through repetition. So repetition matters in terms of being able to.
All day, all day. I mean, it was, and that's the thing. It's throwing rocks, throwing tennis balls, throwing racquetballs, throwing water balloons, throwing dodgeballs in PE. It was always, you growing up, you were always throwing something, and mom would get mad at you because you're, throwing a baseball or a tennis ball or a racquetball against the wall of the house outside of her bedroom, and she'd have to come out and say, go find a different wall. But yeah, hundreds and hundreds, thousands upon thousands of repetitions. That's the only way to do it, right? Just like a position player swinging a bat, if you change your swing every time you try to hit a baseball, it's the same as throwing. If I'm changing my arm angle and trying to throw a baseball differently every time I throw it, body and mind don't know what you're trying to do, So
Yeah. That's a word to the wise. I feel like, especially if go outside and play. That's a good idea. Nino, for 15, 16-year-old kid, and if I'm a parent and I'm watching Game Changer, what is a competitive, so strikes divided by total pitches, right? What would you say is a competitive command rate for a pitcher in game these days?
Yeah. 4 strikes to balls, right? So 3 strikes to every 1 ball. So when you look at that, if you're 2 to 2 right there, it's difficult. If you're on the other side of that, if you're, 1 strike, 3 balls, then the command's an issue. So should be able to throw 3 strikes to every 1 ball if you're really going to look at a command situation.
Vargi, tell me, when a pitcher has good command, how does that change how you coach your lineup?
I mean, you got to be ready to go. You can't be complacent. I mean, we had our sophomore groups this weekend, and we were just really charting. I got them charting how much even counts are we winning. How frequently are we behind 0-1? How frequently are we ahead 1? You know what I mean? And when you get put behind 0-1 and you're unwilling to change your approach, I mean, you're really putting yourself in a hole. And I think that's where a lot of the young hitters, they end up kind of guessing and getting out of their approach, and you could have the best swing possible, but once you lose your approach and you lose the ability to stay aggressive, you're really on the defense.
Yeah, when I was coaching 13-year-olds, and it was my first time coaching, and I never thought about this when I played, but particularly in team sports, 90% plus at least,
Oh
the
yeah,
teams that control the pace of play tend to win,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
And the pace of play in baseball, in particularly, is predicated on if a pitcher throws strikes.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. I've really appreciated. I have a big league game on in the background right now. I really appreciated how the pitch clock in big league games, how if you can sense that there's a rhythm and it's taken out a lot of that excess time. What I do notice in a lot of young pitchers, Stu, what I do notice in a lot of young high school pitchers is a lack of rhythm to how they pitch, not necessarily in their windup, but in a pitch to pitch basis, right? Usually, if guys throw a ball, it's almost like when there's a ball, there's the in between the ball and next pitch vibe. Then, when there's a strike, then there's that vibe. When you're coaching a young pitcher, what do you think is the best rhythm? How do you teach rhythm, and what sort of accountability should a coach have on a young pitcher in not letting them think too much, but then also not making them go too fast?
Well, I think that's developed when, even pre-practice when you're playing catch, right? A lot of these guys are out there down the line playing catch before practice. And, if they get the ball, turn to their buddies, they're talking, they're this, that, then they get the ball and throw it. I mean, you're developing kind of a bad rhythm just in your practice throws, right? Because when you get out there on the mound during a game, it's like the little kid playing goalie in soccer, right? It's like butterfly all the time, right? But you want those guys when they get onto the mound, I mean, what's our focus? What's the count? How many outs? Where are the base runners? All right, step on the rubber. Let's get going. Get the sign. I think a lot of that too is, you know, because I call every single pitch. When it comes to the in game stuff, I call the majority. I bet you I call 90% of the pitches. So, pitches thrown, and then the time where the pitcher's getting the ball back and working his way back up to the rubber, I want to relay that sign to the catcher as soon as possible. So that way, when we step foot on the rubber, I can look in, get my sign, come set, get ready to roll. So I think it's that pitcher catcher relationship. I think different pitchers have different rhythms. Yes. But back to the pitch clock thing, and like Vargas talking about, when pitchers are on it, those are the guys that are getting the ball, no matter if it's a ball or strike, right? Pitch is over, you flush it, you get the ball, and we're on to the next pitch right away, and it's the more time in between pitches. I have this problem with a couple of my pitchers this year where, it's ball one. Okay, a little bit of thought about the pitch. Now it's ball two. Now we're really thinking about the last pitch, right? And we're just kind of up there playing with the baseball, looking at our glove. that internal conversation going on in your head, and that third pitch never really turns out that good because I have all these thoughts right now. I'm thinking about my mechanics and this and that. The less thought we could have between pitches, I think the better results we get. But I think it really comes down to pitcher catcher relationship and keeping the focus on this pitch and not going back to previous pitches or thinking, trying to get too far ahead of yourself when it comes to a count. It's get the ball and go. Like, we want to spend as less time on the defensive side as possible. We want to spend all of our time in the dugout hitting, and I feel like the faster a pitcher works, better results he gets when he's out there on the bump.
Yeah, I agree
Like,
with that. One of the questions that I have in here was about what sort of impact the pitcher's pace has on a good hitter. I will say this, when pitchers take too much time, it gives a hint of fear, right? Or hesitation. And as a hitter, that creates confidence. And that's the exact opposite thing that you want to create, right? I think that there's a lot of nuance to that as in the pitcher hitter relationship, right? Will you talk a little bit more about how a pitcher can command the rhythm of the at bat?
Well, when you have that ball in your hand, right, you're kind of in control of the situation in the game, right? So the game's on you at that point, right? So I kind of think about it as like when you're walking, right? You have a normal walking pace. If I start walking fast, right, I'm in a hurry, right? I'm trying to get somewhere a little faster than normal. And if I'm walking super slow, right, I'm kind of like just kind of lackadaisical, just kind of going through it, right? But when that ball's in your hand, you're the one who's in control of the action. So, especially with a big time hitter in the box, I want to speed him up. I don't want him to be able to step out of the box, fix his batting gloves, get the back foot in there and dig out his little, his hole, kick the dirt around and find his landing spot. I want the sign. I'm set. When he puts that lead foot down, it's go time. I don't want the hitter dictating the pace of the game. Especially when you're the one with the ball in your hand, right? So yeah, the action goes when the pitcher goes. More comfortable a hitter is, you don't want that, right? You don't want the hitter being comfortable. You want him a little bit uneasy in that box.
Hey, coach. Yeah, it sounds like you're in a bathroom.
Really? I'm not. You want me to take these headphones out?
I have you muted and I want to ask you a question. We can edit this out, so I'm not worried about it. There, that's a little better. Nino, I wanted to ask you, when a pitcher controls the pace of play, right? I'm true or false, he gets more strike calls and he controls the running game better.
Yeah, and the defense actually plays better behind him because the rhythm of the game flows, right? So when you throw a lot of balls, the defense gets a little complacent, and it's difficult to play defense when guys aren't when it's not moving. So when the flow of the game goes, it's better for hitters, it's better for pitchers, it's better for defenders, it's better for the umpire. Everything has a rhythm, I think the game is played in 11-second intervals. They say it's 18, and with the pitch clock in the big leagues, it's 20 seconds, but it has to happen before the 20-second mark, right? So if you spend more than 4 seconds after a pitch in the negative part of it, you're already behind. So you only have 7 seconds to catch up before the pitch is made and you're already behind. So we can spend less than 4 seconds on a pitch, have to get back to the present, have to deliver the next pitch within 11 seconds or 18, however you want to look at the game. Probably in high school, it's closer to 18 seconds. But when you look at that, man, the rhythm is controlled. And, Stu talks, I've always talked to hitters about at the major league level, and I know we're talking about younger players, But if you ever go to a major league game and you see a superstar come to the plate, you watch Barry Bonds come to the plate, and the pitcher always acknowledges him before he makes the pitch. He never quick pitches in. He lets him go through his rhythm, right? And I know you don't want to do that at the high school level, but they always they need each other in order to make this rhythm, right? The hitter needs the pitcher needs the hitter, the whole thing. That rhythm flows when they're ready. And I always see superstars acknowledge each other before the pitch is made. Like it's just a nod. I'm ready to go. You're ready to go. Let's do this then.
If a 14-year-old came to you and said, "I want to start throwing my fastball exactly where I want it," where do you begin? I know you said playing catch is a big thing, but if you have somebody who's really in, right? And we met you gave the 21-point game or whatever. What if they don't have a throwing partner, right? How do I master that if I'm a young player? Is it taking a bucket of balls, finding a target and doing it and throwing it from different arm slots? What's your best advice in a 14-year-old who wants to learn how to command the strike zone?
So there's a lot of different tools out there, right? You have the 9 square, You have, if you're in the backyard, you got a brick wall. I could paint dots up on a brick wall, or I could pick out, a brick or a section of bricks on a brick wall and throw a ball against it. I mean, obviously to repeat hitting the same spot is repeating your release point. That's a feel thing. But like for example, I tell kids all the time, like you don't need a throwing part, you don't need somebody to go play catch with. And this is a little bit old school, but the metal for sale signs, right, that are sitting out in front of the houses. I remember my high school coach showed up one day and, we wanted a mound in the backyard. So they put up this little mound, but they had the metal for sale sign and they just kind of tied a net around that square, and it starts like being able to, hit a general area, before I could sit there and, start working corners or up, down, or whatever. If I could start throwing the ball consistently, middle of the zone to a target from 60 feet away, once I get that in and I know where, throwing a strike, what that feels like, now I can sit there and work in and out, right? Because it's game of inches, right? If I'm a left-handed pitcher, if I want to throw into a righty, my extension is just a little bit more, but I think, targets, nine squares. If you don't have a 9 square, then it's, having a wall that you could throw against, going and looking in a mirror, and finding your arm slot, finding your natural arm slot. Where does my arm move fastest, through a zone?
How do I know that? What for sort of feedback? What am I looking for when I look into a mirror to know when you say natural arm slot? How do I know where that is?
Right. So, like different arm angles, right? You're over the top, you're low 3/4, your sidearm. If I'm standing, I got a big mirror in the bathroom and I could sit there and mimic throwing, I could start going over the top and I'm gonna go through my whole movement. I'm gonna watch my hand, right? I'm gonna watch my hand and I'm gonna feel where my arm feels it moves faster. So I'm gonna play around with it over the top, long arm over the top, maybe a little, shorter arm, low 3/4, maybe sidearm, but like for example, I could sit there and do jumping jacks and then speed up how I'm doing jumping jacks, right? And I can see myself moving faster. Same thing with mimicking throwing a ball. I might think because it's with young guys, we're always telling them, stay on top of the ball, stay through it. So kids when they're learning how to throw, everybody's almost straight over the top like the old Iron Mike arm, right? And then as you get older and stronger, arm angles start to change. They might be an infielder too, so they throw from different arm angles. But if I'm staring at a mirror, I mean, I'm mimicking my throwing motion. I'm trying to move my hand as fast as possible through the throwing zone. Some guys, it might be over the top. Some guys, it might be, a click over. It might be low 3/4. But back to, being athletic, and being an athlete, I want to be able to move my arm and hand as fast as possible. So one way to do that, or put a towel in your hand, right? I can put a towel in my hand and go through that same thing and see where I can move that towel the fastest, right? And
The
through that,
whoosh.
you kind of find your natural throwing motion arm slot.
Coach, I want you to answer this question first. When's the right age for a young pitcher to start learning how to throw a breaking ball?
Varies, obviously it was always like 12, 13 years old when your arms developed so that you don't hurt yourself. I think it varies based on where your development is as a player. So if you're physically stronger, you're probably capable of spinning the baseball. If you're not if you're not breaking glass, like Stu said earlier in the podcast, probably not a good idea you start spinning it if you're not breaking glass, because you just don't have the velocity and you don't have the spin rate in order to do it. You're going to end up forcing the elbow forward or putting too much torque into that position. So I think 12, 13 years old, that's probably right there on the cusp. Maybe you can do it earlier. Maybe I'm out of touch with that, but I think, if the 9 squares, 4 quadrants, you got to be able to throw your fastball to. Until you can throw your fastball to 4 quadrants, down and in for a strike, up and in for a strike, down and away for a strike, up and away for a strike, I wouldn't mess with anything else until you can command 2 strikes to the glove side and 2 strikes to the arm side. If you can't command those, don't mess around with the breaking ball yet.
Yeah, I'll come back to you, Stu, on the off speed. I think that to your point about the 4 quadrants, Nino, your glove size. So if I'm right-handed and this is my
Yeah.
glove side, you being able to locate at the knees on your glove side, the angle of the pitch. So if I'm left-handed and this is my glove side, those angles of those pitches are incredibly hard to hit. And if you look at
Yeah.
the batting averages on fastballs, they're always going to be the lowest. The lowest batting average is going to be found in the lowest part of the strike zone away from the hitter. It's where the hitter has the least margin for error for sure. So if you're looking for a place to start as a parent or as a player and you want to go out and have a catch and teach a kid, the very first thing that they want to become skilled at as a pitcher is locating the ball down and away or down on the glove
Yes.
side that they throw with. Yeah. To build a little bit off of the breaking ball. So if I'm not ready for a breaking ball, showed you had a baseball in your hand before. With
Yeah.
some variance in grips that younger players can play around with that create a change in speeds that don't necessarily cause an enormous amount of stress on the arm.
Yeah, so always starts with the four seam, right? You talk about the fastball. I think it's one of those things like at the very basis of a breaking ball. I also have a football here too, right? We've probably all heard of the football slider, right? See, put it in here, and I'm not gonna be twisting or any of that kind of stuff. I'm just gonna throw it like a football, right? When I throw a football, I have my wrist fixed, hands on the side of the ball, and I'm just throwing a football, creating spin, right? So that football slider, football curve, whatever it is, I'm just, putting that a C grip, right? Making a C, putting that thing in my hand. I'm just gonna throw it like a football, no turning. But we kind of talk about the fastball, right? Another variant of that, we could go kind of cutter, where I kind of move my hand over a little bit to where I'm a little more on the side of the baseball instead of right down the middle, right? So I can move my hands and offset it a little bit, right? And I can throw that just like a fastball to where when I let go of that pitch, it's coming off the side of my hand and creating more like cutter spin versus true backspin like a fastball. Okay, so slider or football slider, C grip, throw it like a football with the stiff wrist, kind of create some spin. You could go, off the four seam, you could go cutter, just offset it. No spinning, just throwing it regular, and that ball's gonna come off kind of to the side and create just a little bit of cutter spin on it. still a fastball, still low stress on the arm. And then when you really get to it, if you could go, a little knuckle curve type of action, right? Where I'm, just kind of putting my fingertip in the middle of the ball. Naturally when I kind of get to extension with that, it's kind of getting my hand off to the side of the baseball and creating spin, and I'm not having to like really torque that thing. I think that's kind of where a breaking ball starts for young kids. But I'm with Nino. The fastball is four pitches in itself, right? Down and in, down and away, up and in. That's 4 pitches. If I can develop, especially being a lefty, it was always hard for me to get in on a righty, with just that kind of natural lefty movement. When I learned how to throw the cutter, that kind of allowed me to get to that down and in zone to a righty coming from the left side. But yeah, just simple football slider, cutter grip, offset the ball a little bit, maybe a knuckle curve, because if I can't spin a fastball and create backspin, it's going to be really hard for me to create overspin on a ball and not change the way mechanically how I throw a baseball, right?
I feel like the wrist flick is really important for young players to learn how to do. They grow up and they do a lot of this. They got a lot of this going on, and that does not translate to the wrist flick.
No.
And being able to create true spin with your fastball, and then just messing with grips or off centering, right? Creating
Mhm.
pressure points in your fingers or offsetting. If you have good wrist finish, that's going to give you movement. And that's what brings me to Luke question for Lucas. Lucas, tell me, when you were a hitter, tell me about what made a pitcher deceptive or hard to hit. Not anything to do with velocity, not even necessarily anything to do with command. From a hitter's perspective, what is hard to see? What is deceiving? What was intimidating for you as a hitter?
Well, I think the tunneling. If a pitcher could tunnel really well with the four seam and a curveball, where it looks like a four seam out of the hand, and then it's going to break late, or a changeup where the ball's kind of tumbling out of the hand. Like those are some tough things to kind of you know see right away. As the game keeps going. If it's a slider and you could see the red dot in the middle, then like, that's kind of an easy pitch to sit on. And I think when we're talking about like the 13, 16-year-old level, I tell guys all the time, fastball curveball is usually going to get you by until you get to varsity. And then after that, a hitter's kind of able to take away your curveball if you don't have a whole lot of velo. So there were times, where if a guy was sitting, under 84, and he had a curveball and I know he was going to go do it consistently, there's times I'd hunt the curveball and, react to his fastball in the location. But if he had a third pitch where he could really spot it up, like a good changeup or a cutter, like Stu's saying, that makes my job as a hitter a whole lot harder. You know what I mean? Where you can't eliminate any pitches and you have to be ready to go to all three of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Stu, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I used to Roy Halladay's first 3 seasons as a pro. So he was a senior when I was in high school, when I was a freshman in high school. And so then my sophomore, junior, and senior years during the winters, Bus Campbell, who was a Blue Jay scout, the guy who drafted him, he was local in Denver, and he wanted me to learn how to catch. So you'd have me meet Roy Halladay at Littleton High School on every Sunday during the winter, and I caught Roy Halladay, right?
How'd
So
that go?
yeah, his command was incredible,
Yeah.
right? So it was good because he was high velocity, and then for me not being an experienced catcher, it wasn't like stuff was going everywhere. So it was pretty clean. I will say that. I tell this story and I bring it up not in that light. It was how much Roy Halladay had changed from being a minor league Roy Halladay to what he ended up becoming as the Hall of Fame version. As fate would have it, in 2011, I was in Major League Camp with the Phillies again. So I went from 1995, 6, and 7, those winters. I caught Roy Halladay. Fast forward 14 years and he had completely transformed himself. And so for me to stand in, and I knew him intimately, obviously, I knew what his stuff was like from catching him every Sunday in off seasons when I was in high school. Fast forward 14 years later, and this is hard to believe, but his stuff was better when he was in high school or first out of high school
Wow.
than when he was at the height of his career and a Cy Young winner and a guy who threw a perfect game and an eventual Hall of Famer. What he learned was movement. He did not throw harder. He actually threw not as hard later in his career, but he had 3 fastballs. He had the straight one, he had the cutter that moved about 3 inches right as the bat would start, and he had the sinker that moved. I mean, his mastery of movement is what made Roy Halladay a Hall of Fame pitcher. His velocity and stuff made him a first round pick out of high school. But I think what a lot of people forget about Roy Halladay is that I think he actually has like the record for highest ERA in a season, which was his rookie year. It was something ridiculous because he got absolutely annihilated when he first got to the big leagues. Fast forward 10 years when he becomes the guy who he was, he threw softer and with more movement. Talk a little bit about, you said a fastball is 4 pitches right there. Like,
Mhm.
we talked about fastball command at the beginning. How do I learn and I just asked you about tweaking that. How do I learn how to use that in a game? How do I control the rhythm of a game? How do I create an ebb and flow as a pitcher by just using movement, not necessarily relying on stuff?
Well, that's the thing is, you know, like Luke said earlier, it's easy when you know, right, where the pitcher's gonna pitch it, or where he's gonna move it. I was always taught in college, you either wanted to you definitely wanted to move a hitter's feet. You wanted to make a hitter move his feet during an at bat, but you also want to change the hitter's eyes. Okay, so that fastball up closer to the eyes looks easier to hit. Low in the zone, like you talked about earlier, that's where the lowest batting averages are. And then back to your Halladay point, right? If that ball's right down the middle and you don't know if it's going to go this way or this way or this way, right? Everything kind of looks the same. If I fall behind in the count, what do we always tell a pitcher? Hey, throw a strike, let the hitter hit, right? I think learning how to do that, right? Going back to like the catch play, grip catch is huge. Being able to sit there and using the pitchers, or your throwing partner's upper body, right? The shoulders, top of the zone, the hips, bottom of the zone, and being able to sit there and move it around. It comes through repetition. I've got to do that through bullpens. It's not something that I'm just going to go play catch and then get up there on the mound and think that I'm going to sit here and be able to move the ball up, down, in, out, all that kind of stuff, right? Let's train through bullpens. You get better when you're on the mound. But I think, from just trying to make that pitch, it might be the same pitch, but trying to make that pitch look different, you know, depending on where I'm throwing that pitch. Especially as a young pitcher, I can go out there and pitch in a game and throw one pitch. If I can move it in, out, up, down, I shouldn't have to throw another pitch in a youth baseball game, especially like the 13, 14U level. If I can move it in, out, up, down, that looks like 4 different pitches to a hitter. I think that's what we need to do with younger pitchers is, hey, go out there, throw the fastball, learn how to move it in and out, up and down. You don't get to throw any other pitch other than the fastball. That's how you learn how to pitch,
Uh-huh.
really. Versus, hey, fastball, curveball, changeup, all this kind of stuff. I've got a pitcher on my pitching staff now that, I'm not joking, he's got 5 different pitches and he's consistent with 0 of them, right? And, hey, it doesn't matter how many pitches you throw, you know, can you throw any of them consistent? Okay. Fastball, two seam. Okay. Curveball, slider, changeup, and throws like a spike change type of thing. This kick change thing that everybody's kind of trying to throw nowadays.
Okay.
I'm a big believer. Like, hey, Tim Hudson was a great example for me. Like, hey, he's probably was one of the first guys that I saw watching the game that could throw a slider and a curveball for strikes and could go back and forth with them, right? But yeah, fastball, two seam, that's basically the same, and then slider, curveball, circle change, kick change. And if he couldn't throw it for a strike, we were trying to learn a new pitch,
Okay.
which blew my mind.
Well, back to Vargy's point about tunneling. I would always be weary. Like for instance, Roy Halladay had the knuckle curve in high school, right? He had the knuckle curve, but then when you start facing guys and you show them the knuckle, then that totally washes out your tunneling. And based on what you just told me about that new changeup, like you lose the effectiveness on the change of speeds when I see your knuckles. That's
Right.
just a yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No doubt, and I think, like, if you're able to, if there's ways you can change arm angles and learn to throw from different arm angles, I might have my normal arm angle, but I could still drop down every now and again and throw a fastball. Like, you think of a middle infielder dropping down and throwing on the run and being able to drop that arm angle down. Even then, like, I could throw fastballs from one arm angle. I get up in the count, I drop my arm angle a little bit and throw it from a different spot,
There's nothing
especially as
Nothing about that surprises me about you. In fact, you know what? I've never faced you, but I could almost just by knowing how you coach, I'm like, you're just too smart of a guy that I'm like, I know you would drop down. And I have to say, I don't know if Lucas, if you'll agree with me, but a dude that drops down with two strikes, then that gets in the back of your mind.
Oh yeah.
And it is all about deception of the hitter. And if you have any sort of anything that you can do to create doubt in the hitter's mind, you should definitely use it.
Well,
Absolutely.
I think that's like where we're talking about just the effectiveness of a fastball though. Like if you have a guy that's here and then he's able to drop it down to here, like that fastball looks a little bit harder than what it really is just because he's changing where it's coming from. You know what I mean? So it all plays a role for sure.
Played with a guy named Oliver Perez. I don't know if you remember that name, Stu, but he ended up pitching like 18 years. I played with him when he was young, when he was 19, and he had three arm angles and two windup speeds, right? So he had his high leg kick, and then he'd have his slide step, and then he threw from three angles, right? Well, that is six variants out the out of the
yeah.
box without even having to change speeds. I feel like that's something that a lot of young kids don't that's a huge leg up. And by the way, when you're 13, 14, and 15, nobody's expecting you to be perfect. Experiment a little bit with your different arm angles, especially if you're ahead in the count. Like you never know what you're gonna find. What do you think?
No, I'm with it. I mean, so a college teammate of mine was Sergio Romo, right? And he closed for the Giants and, for a bunch of teams. And I thought he was crazy because every time he'd go 0-2, he wouldn't go to a breaking ball. He would drop his arm angle down and throw a sidearm fastball to a dude. And I can't tell you how many times he would miss a batter, strike somebody out strictly based on the arm angle.
Yes.
But yeah, no, we're not expecting perfection. I mean, look at any night in a big league game, right? The hitters are good at that level hitting mistakes. You can't expect a kid to, dot a glove. I mean, you know, it, it's almost unrealistic with young pitchers, right? To expect them to hit a spot every single time. Sometimes you're going to miss a spot and it's still going to be a really good pitch. Catcher might be set up down and away, but I might miss low and in, or I might miss, a little bit up or something. But, as long as you're not just throwing it down the middle, as long as we're like in the area, if catcher set up down and away, I want to miss down and away, up and away, I want to miss up and away. I don't want to miss to the middle of the strike zone. But I'm with you. Pitching is hard enough, right? The mental, the physical, it's hard enough, let alone expecting perfection and a young kid, man in the arena type of thing. It's easy for the person watching to sit up there and tell the young kid what they need to do, this and that, right? It's once you step up there on the mound, you realize how difficult it is to, throw it to the radius of a catcher's glove from 60 feet away, 54 feet away, wherever they're throwing that. You just want them to keep it fun, have fun, do your best type of thing. But yeah, it's hard to be perfect.
Yeah, I didn't know that you played with Romo coming up. I faced him a lot, actually. Faced him a lot. Before he really established himself, he had like 2 years where he was up and down, and then we were in the same division. He was one of the few guys that you could tell he knew what a hitter was thinking,
Mhm.
like just the way he pitched. And so then what I remember about him is that his pattern was there's no pattern.
No.
Like, it does not matter if it's a fastball count. He does not mean he's going to throw a fastball. You know,
Yeah.
Nino, you know, the state of play in the games today is coaches. Stu even mentioned he calls like 90% of his pitches and whatnot. How does a young pitcher show you in a game that he has baseball IQ to compete at the college level, even if he's not calling his pitches, right? And let's say that he doesn't knock the Sox up with the radar. How does a young player demonstrate that they have a high baseball IQ on the mound?
Yeah, I think you were talking about Romo, there was no pattern, right? So you think about you go see a young high school kid play, he's got to be able to command the strike zone away if he doesn't, have top velocity. But he has to be able to go in. He has to be able to go in. So he has to be able to know when he wants to go in and he has to aggressively go in. Doesn't have to overthrow it. He just has to go in. So the changeup that misses location that goes in to hitters is jammed to more hitters than I could write a book or give you guys a statistic, right? The hitter jams himself on the changeup numerous times. If the changeup's in the middle, it gets killed, right? If it's elevated, it gets hit. If it's down and away, sometimes it's a rollover. But when the changeup is in, it jams guys consistently. And so you don't need velocity to go in. You just have to be able to go in to keep the hitter from leaning over to get to your pitches that are down and away. So I would say if I went to see a kid pitch, when to add and subtract, when to add and when to subtract, when to add and go in, when to subtract and go away. If I see that, great. There's three things that I want to see out of every high school kid when I go watch them play. I want to see the command of the fastball. I want to see if they can hold runners, and I want to see if they can field their position. If they can do those three things, the velocity is going to come. But boy, if you can't hold runners, you can't field your position, and you don't know how to add and subtract, you're going to struggle.
Yeah, I'll use this story as a segue into a question for you, Vargas. So in 2007, I was in camp with the St. Louis Cardinals, and they had won the 2006 World Series, and Albert Pujols they had the best first 10 years ever or whatever, right? So even at that stage of my career, I had this idea that plate coverage was a thing. And then I remember I went into the video room and I watched Albert Pujols's, and you could just line them up, right? So I was like, all right, show me Albert Pujols and show me every single one of his extra base hits from 2006, his MVP year. And I was absolutely astounded that he did not hit pitches he didn't like have unbelievable plate coverage. But if you miss down the middle, bro, that ball got wasted, absolutely murdered. It was just one hit after the other. And it really opened my mind, particularly at that stage of my career, to think like, dude, and that's when I just gave up. Like, man, when pitchers make good pitches, you're out.
Mhm.
You're out, man. Like, that's just what it is. You have to hit the mistakes. And so, to your point, Nino, about being able to command, like, if you can understand how to miss on the fringes or outside of those fringes and to stay away from the middle, hitting becomes dramatically more difficult if it's not in the middle. Absolutely. I mean, and I was astounded even at the big league level. I'm like, man, he must have had 40 doubles and 40 homers that year, right? Pujols did, and I'm like, they still threw it down the middle.
Yeah.
Why would you throw it down the middle to that dude? But they still do. So, Vargy, that's a segue into a question for you. So tell me, what are the biggest mechanical and mindset challenges you see in young hitters in the early high school years? And what do you think are the things that are genuinely holding them back from being elite?
Well, I think the big, like, as far as the mindset goes, I think they're still in the process of like understanding how to really hit. You know what I mean? Like a lot of them are still caught up and I'm more athletic, I'm more physical. I could go up there and I could look for anything that's close and I could go and try driving it. But as they start getting older and pitchers start getting a little bit better, their approaches need to get more defined. You know what I mean? They got to be more specific about what they're looking for. And like you said, is it a pitcher's pitch or is it a hitter's pitch? There's so many times where they go, well, it would have been called a strike. And it's like, okay, but is that necessarily a pitch that you were going to be able to drive? Or do you think he would have probably missed somewhere else where you could have got a better pitch? So like the mental side of getting them to understand like, hey, we got to refine your approach a little bit. We got to get you to understand, do you hit the middle outside better? Do you hit the middle inside better? What are you looking for? Where's the pitcher missing at? Where is he locating? What's his arm slot? All of those things kind of play a role and you got to start locking in a little bit sooner than just going up to the box and going, hey, if it's close, I'm going to hit it. Like that's probably a 12 and under approach. And when you start getting a 13, 14, getting into high school, you got to start locking in probably when you're in the hole, if not sooner. So you could start forming that game plan and understanding, he's working away to 80% of the lineup here. I could hunt it and I could go get it. Okay, like the big metaphor I give guys, like you don't go to Buffalo Wild Wings and order a cheeseburger. So if you're going to be looking for a middle in pitch and he hasn't thrown middle in, the whole game, that's probably not a good approach. You probably got to be able to shift a little bit. And like mechanically, I would say it's just the desire of wanting to chase exit below. Like there's so many times where we're testing guys and then they're going, well, what was the exit velocity there? And I'm going, I don't really care what your exit velocity is. I want to know how many times were you able to get a barrel in that round. If you have a great exit velo, but I feed you 20 pitches and you only got 7 hits, I don't want I don't want that guy. Give me the guy that I could give 20 pitches to and you could get 15 barrels. So trying to just get them to understand it's not about trying to hit a home run. It's not trying to hit a double. It's about understanding what's the game asking from you in that moment. What's the situational? Well, is there a guy on second base? Is there a guy on third base? Are you a big guy? Are you a tiny guy? Do I necessarily expect you to go and get a double when you're only weighing 110 pounds? The answer is probably not. You know what I mean? It's just a little bit of maturing, on the mental side of things, and then also really trying to get a little bit more barrel control as you get older.
Yeah, coach, when I was coaching a 13, a 14, and a 15-year-old team, it was I would make them keen in on, and it's hard for young players to do this, but when pitchers are warming up in between innings and in the bullpen, they show you what them and the catcher show you what their life is on the ball, right? Right. So if I have a catcher and it's a right-handed thrower and the catcher keeps catching it like this, he's got to run. Right. And that's the thing. When the catchers aren't framing it, right, when they are doing their thing in between innings and they're showing you the life that the ball has, right? And then in terms of how a 14, 15, or 16-year-old kid, right, how they can what sort of information is realistic, right? So if I'm a right-handed hitter and I'm facing a right-handed pitcher who I know has a lot of run, what's the right adjustment? What is the way to take that sort of information and apply it in a way that will enhance my performance?
Yeah, I think you need to know where the pitch starts and where the pitch is going to end, right? You need to understand if he's sinking it, you need to see it up. If he's running it, you need to kind of see it away from you a little bit. If he's cutting it, you need to see it closer to you, right? You need to start to understand those things. But I think to Luke's point, don't go up there and hit with 2 strikes the entire at bat. Stop hitting with 2 strikes. Stop trying to cover the whole plate. And when you get to 2 strikes, stop chasing because it still has to come across 17 inches of the plate with 2 strikes. So understand that stop moving so far away to hit the pitch or so far in to hit the pitch or so far up or so far down. I mean, Albert Pujols did it best, and you said it. He went to the middle of the plate, and when the ball showed up, he put an absolute whooping on it, right? And I think we need to understand that with our hitters. Our hitters need to understand, hey, how do I move to the center of the plate to hit the ball instead of moving to the outside quadrant and then trying to adjust to in? are moving to the inside quadrant and having to adjust to away. How about if we move to the middle? And if it's a little in, I can get to it. And if I move to the middle and it's a little away, I can stay through it. And I think maybe that's something where Albert was, he was just trying to get the ball out over the white part of the plate. And if he got it, he made a living, a good living.
I remember Scott Rowland telling a story about Albert in a hitters meeting, and they were talking about somebody's changeup against the Astros. I forget who. And he was like, he said, Tagg, don't listen to Albert. He goes, a guy has a good changeup, and Albert's solution is to move up in the box 8 inches. Right, right. And that's just how simple it was. That's the anomaly that was Albert Pujols, was that it was that simple for him. Because segue to another question for you, Luke. Albert was relaxed enough, but that was Albert's difference, right? Watching Pujols work on a day-to-day basis, he was an absolute freak for sure, but he wasn't like overly ridiculously strong. He wasn't overly ridiculously fast. What he was unbelievably consistent. And that's because, so that hitters meeting against Houston, as an example, and his solution was to just move up 6 to 8 inches in the box. Now, I know that for me, that would immediately cause tension, right? Cause tension. So how do you coach a player? Because I hear you talk about this in the cage a lot when you work on one-on-one with guys or in small groups. How does a young hitter manifest relaxation in the batter's box?
Well, I think it comes from the work that they're putting in when they're in the cage. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the lessons that I'm working with when they come in the first time, we start tee work and they're swinging out of their butts, and it's like there's a person coming up from behind them ready to go, like it's a line almost. You know what I mean? And that's where it kind of starts. And it's just like, listen, dude, you're not rushing. This isn't a race. You know what I mean? You're trying to figure out what's your tempo, what's your rhythm, what do you feel most comfortable working on? And to what we talked about early with the tempo and rhythm on the pitcher side of it, we're trying to stay at our own as a hitters. You know what I mean? We're not trying to just adapt and start getting sped up or start getting slowed down. We want to stay true to what we do. And that's why to me, once you're in the game, like you don't have the time to start thinking about stuff mechanically. You got to have belief in what you're doing in the cage. So if you're in the cage and you're going, okay, I'm working easy, I feel good, I feel grounded, I'm getting my barrel to the ball, then you're able to do it. But it takes time to get there. And I think the big thing is you just have to get guys to understand that they're not speeding themselves up when they see quicker velo. They're not slowing themselves down when they see slower velo. It needs to be the same thing every time. And it's trying to get them to really buy in on, you need to stay at your comfort. You can't just go, okay, this guy's going faster. We got to go change things up. Now you could shorten up, but that doesn't mean you should be speeding it up. And I think there's a difference to it, and you really got to get them to understand it. I mean, it takes time. Like for me, mechanically, like one of my favorite things to do is I love doing the angle work, just because it's really focusing on contact point and posture. But then when I feel like they're starting to handle that well, I love mixing in the slower stuff because it's like, hey, yeah, I'm trying to mess with you on purpose. But just because I'm trying to mess with you, that doesn't mean you allow me to do it. And that's what kind of gets them to start understanding it and translating it into game. You know what I mean? At least that's kind of, my one of my big things I love doing.
Absolutely. Stu, when a lineup or sometimes an individual hitter, how does a pitcher who can tell that a hitter or a lineup is relaxed, how do they disrupt that relaxation?
I mean, like one of my like you want to create a little bit of frenziness in their head, right? Like a lot of it's by the book, right? You're going to pitch them normal first time through the box, or first time through the lineup, they're going to see a lot of fastballs. Second time through the lineup, they're going to see, you're going to pitch them a little bit backwards. When a hitter's comfortable, I go back to what I said earlier. I'm going to make him move his feet. Like I want a hitter to move his feet. If he's on the dish, I want to make him uncomfortable. I want to make him feel a little bit crowded. One thing that I love to do with my pitchers is, fastball and off speed counts and off speed and fastball counts, just to kind of play with the hitter's head a little bit. That's we played Erie earlier this year, and after the game, we played them pretty close, gave up one earned against them, and it was one of those things. A few of their hitters come up after the game and they're like, dude, I don't know how we didn't, how we didn't hit you guys better. And I was like, because like, I know you guys as a hitter. I know you guys are like, some of the best couple of the best players in 5A up there playing at Erie. And it's like I told him, I said, I wanted to make you guys uncomfortable and make you guys think about the game a little bit. And I said, I'm going to throw you guys fastball and off speed counts and off speed and fastball counts because a hitter is very comfortable 2 or 1 or 3-1, right? And when it comes to pitching, like we need to throw multiple pitches and multiple counts, in order to not just sit there and get teed off on, right? So, it's one of those things to kind of mess up a hitter's comfortability. I'm going to make them move their feet. I'm going to make them feel, maybe make them feel rushed, maybe pick the tempo up a little bit on them, not let them dig in, but I'm going to make you move your feet, or chase your hands a little bit, or, I'm going to mix it up. And like, you might have, you might have a plan. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Right. But, it's like one of those deals. Like if it's 1-0 and you think a fastball is coming, like we're not going to throw a fastball because we got confidence we could throw multiple pitches in that count, so just kind of, messing up the rhythm or the preparation, right? Hitters are always working, trying to get themselves into hitters counts. And as a pitcher, if I can throw multiple pitches, multiple arm angles and different type of counts and still be able to have the confidence I'm going to throw it for a strike, that's that's kind of what we do.
What what drove me nuts as a hitter was a chatty catcher.
Yeah.
Like that's a good advice for a pitching staff is you want to disrupt a hitter's mind flow, then have a chatty catcher with the umpire. And by and large, umpires like chatty catchers, at least the respectful ones, right? So if you have an emotionally intelligent catcher and you want to disrupt the vibe of a lineup, get them talking. Talk about everything. Ask where the pitch was. In fact, I have multiple instances in pro ball of where I'm like, dude, shut up.
Yeah. Well,
Be quiet.
like even then, like what do the dugout always say after the second or third pickoff attempt to first base, right? Everybody gets a little bit on edge. Hey, chapter 3, all this kind of stuff coming from the peanut gallery in the dugout, right? I mean, I could sit there and pick over a few times if there's runner on base. I can
Yes.
step off, go through the signs, step off. Hey, give me a new ball. I don't like this one. Kind of things like that too.
Yeah. Nino, what do players at age 13 to 15 need to be showing in game situations to be putting themselves on a path towards being recruited? Not stats. What does the live body actually look like?
Yeah, just they have to be able to control their body movement. I think as a youngster, right, and control the flight of the baseball when they hit it. So more on the line, but until they get strong enough to where they can change that angle. But command of the strike zone as a hitter, same thing as command of the strike zone as a pitcher. I think when you start commanding the strike zone and everything works in the middle of the field and it works a little bit to right center, a little bit to left center, I think you're in a really good spot. I think if you're working down the lines as a young hitter, you're gonna there's gonna be some problems there, right? So if you're too much to the pull side, that means the barrel's too far out in front, trying to do too much with it. If you're working too much towards the right field line, the barrel's too late and you're having a hard time getting to it. I'm not saying that you can't get some hits in those areas of the field, but when you go out and see a young player play and he can stay from the left center field gap to the right center field gap and he can hit it on a line, that's what you really want to be working on as a player. And then when you get stronger, those line drives are going to start carrying out of the ballpark.
Yeah. I remember you came and watched my 13-year-old team, and you've mentioned this on the podcast before, but about being you're a movement expert. Baseball coaches are movement experts. It- We've talked about it at the upper level. What if I am a parent of an 11 to 13 or 14-year-old kid, what movements are you talking about? Like
Yeah.
what do I what is like, and Stu mentioned being like a good athlete. Yeah, I get it. what does that manifest? When you're watching a 13-year-old, or when you watched Corbin Frost as a 13-year-old and being like, that kid moves different. What does that
Yeah.
mean? What was he doing that was
Yeah.
different?
Yeah, I think rotational movement is really what you're looking for, right? Because it's a rotational sport, whether you're pitching or hitting. So it's always rotational movement. Can you rotate before you swing? Meaning, can you load? Can you rotate through your swing? Can you deliver the bat and drive the baseball? But when you look at movements, right, it's like if there's no movement, you notice it. If there's good movement, you notice it, and it starts from the ground. So it starts from the ground. When you watch kids move at a young age, it starts from the ground. When they can get to their stride foot, set it down, rotate and swing, you're like, wow, we're going to get somewhere. If they're still moving forward to the front side too heavy, you can see it. If they lean back to start, they're stuck. So it's more of a rotational thing. If you were to take a pole, stick it down through their head, can they rotate back without moving the pole? Can they rotate forward without moving the pole? But if the pole moves backwards and the pole moves forward, you're gonna there are a lot of things that need to be fixed because you're not rotational in your movement.
I see you shaking your head there, Stu. So this is a perfect time for me to ask, because I know you were a left-handed pitcher who dominated a running game. Am I right in that assumption? People
A
didn't
little
run on
bit,
you very much, did they? Yeah.
not really.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's open that chapter of the book. Like, if you're a left-handed pitcher, controlling the running game, the higher you go, the more important it gets. No doubt. Right. And I really feel it's a huge advantage, particularly in the younger age bracket, 14 to 18 years old. If you demonstrate that ability, that is something that's huge. How did you learn how to do that? How does a young player incorporate, a left-handed pitcher incorporate that?
I think it's just a fun part of the game, right? Being able to make it look like going to the plate. Right? I'm going to lift my leg and make it look the same, but I'm going to, like what Nino was talking about, I'm gonna be able to like rotate the bottom of my body without rotating the top of my body and being able to still throw it over to first base, right? It was always fun being a lefty because like you'd almost laugh mid pitch because you'd lift your leg and you'd see dudes diving back into first base and you're not even gonna go over there. But it's a huge part. It's that comfort knowing that if I allow a hit or a walk and somebody to get onto first base, in the back of my mind, I know that I can maybe help myself out a little bit by maybe somebody gets a little bit too big of a lead, or I lift my leg and I see them lean towards second. I could put it down and go over. I think controlling the running game is a willingness to work on it, a willingness not to be worried about throwing the baseball away. That's what us coaches always harp, right? Like we're scared for young guys to pick off or, run some back picks or something like that with a young team because we're so worried that the ball is going to get thrown into right field on a pick off. And then all of a sudden we got runners on third. But that was always a fun part of the game for me. I had an old mailman back in the day that he was like the only other grew up in a small town, so there wasn't a whole lot of lefties, and there wasn't a whole lot of people that were good at baseball. But I found like the right combination, and one of our male guys back in the day is a left-handed. He's left-handed, and he was a pitcher, and he was an old timer. And it was one of those things that it was like, hey, this is how you do it. This is what you're trying to do. But it was also a thing that you have to develop that and work on it the same as you would just pitching and throwing a baseball.
Right. How did you do that? Did you use like the control? Like, did you use a mirror to see what your body was doing? How did you do it?
Yeah, you'd use a mirror. You would look in the mirror and you would kick your leg up and go home, and then you would kick your leg up and pick to first, and you tried to make it look as similar as possible. It was also one of those things like Andy Pettit always had a good move. Tom Glavine was pretty good at controlling the running game. It was always the guys that weren't overpowering pitchers that were really good at it. John Lester never picked to first base, right? Was notorious about it. But, I think it was one of those things too, where when you're playing catch, I would face my throwing partner that way, and I would go through and try to make everything look and feel the same. and still throw it to the dude in front of me, and yeah, mirror, just being adaptable and being able to throw the baseball from different angles and things like that. But yeah, the mirror was huge. So that way you know what it looked like. Once you know what it looks like, now you feel what it feels like, and then you transfer that out to the baseball field. And when you're playing catch, it was one of those deals that you'd work on it when you'd play catch too.
There were a handful of guys that if you got a really good move, it works on hitters too. Because a guy with a really good move can sometimes be looking like he's going the first and then he delivers the ball. Like you because it's a hip thing, right? And some guys, I swear, some guys would even manipulate their balance to make it look like they were going home, but then they're really just throwing across their body just a little bit more when they
Yeah.
come home. And that was a stress as a hitter
Well, and you
too.
could get that knee to cross the midline, but if your foot doesn't cross the rubber,
Yeah.
like you're good, so it was
Yeah.
all in like how you would lift your leg. Everybody looks for the shoulders. Like if I lift and go to the plate, like and I turn my shoulders, I'm coming to first. So it was, can I lift, play with the 45, make my leg look like it was going home, right? So you like that foot's going to the plate, and then last minute it's going over to first base for the pick. There's a lot of things that go into it, but it was also a fun part of the game where like you get one over on a base runner.
Yeah, man. I can't stress it enough. If you're a young left-handed pitcher, you should have a good move. Put in
100%.
the work. Yeah, absolutely. It will do nothing but increase your value as you go along. Being able to control the running game is huge, and it's such an advantage as a left-handed pitcher to be able to do that.
Well, being confident in throwing a baseball and not having to stare and look exactly where you're going to
Yeah,
throw it, like knowing your arm
yeah,
enough to where like I don't have to look over at first base, in order to throw it there. Like if I could just keep my head there the whole time and see peripherally kind of where the runner was at and lift and not have to like then that's just something you add to it, right? Like I can get good at this, but if I lift and look over, that dude's going to go back and now I pick up my target and
yeah,
go to the plate. It's like the game within the game.
yeah, yeah, man. I've never seen you pitch, and I just know you, I know your personality, and I'm like, "Yeah, dude, I know
Dude,
that
I
you
love
knew."
picking guys off, man. I was always, and if I was always trying to make it happen. Always.
Yeah,
The best part was when you pick your first baseman off, right? When he starts
yes,
shuffling off the bag, not, like that's when you know you got a really good move.
yes. Yeah, I believe that. Alright. So, we'll wrap it up. Lucas, you got a 14-year-old kid, and he says he wants to become an elite high school hitter, and he wants to become a college recruit. What's the one thing? What's the one drill? What's the one thing he should master in order to accomplish that?
I would say, I mean, we could get to the drills, but I'd say make sure he's staying assertive in his mindset versus telling himself not to do certain things in the box, but making it an assertive thing. I'm hunting for this, not a mindset of don't look for this, don't swing at that, don't do this. Just keeping the mindset assertive and then making sure he's staying true to himself. You know what I mean? Just understanding what he's going to need to do. You know what I mean? If, like I said, I already talked about the sizes a bit, but just making sure if he's a smaller guy, like he has the ability to execute barrel awareness and put the ball in play with infield back. If the infield's in, having the ability to hit it over him. You know what I mean? And then if you're a bigger guy, understanding, you're going to need to be able to hit some doubles. You're going to need to be able to play with a contact point that's a little bit more out front without getting jumpy. You know what I mean? And then drills that I would have them do. I'm really big. Like, especially as they start getting older, I like getting the smash balls out on 'em just because they have a little bit more movement and it makes them really hone in on what their approach is going to be. You know what I mean? If they get caught trying to hit everything like we talked about and you're trying to cover the whole plate, you're probably not going to barrel up a whole lot of them. But if you could stay true to those ones that are going to stay over the middle, you're going to see you still are going to have some success. Just keeping them true to their approach, staying true to what they do well versus trying to be somebody they're not would be my biggest piece of advice for them.
Stu, freshman in your program, comes up to you in the fall meeting, says, "I wanna be a dog. I wanna be the top pitching recruit out of the state of Colorado." What are you having him do?
Getting in the excuse me, getting them in the weight room I want them to, if I'm going to be a dog, we got to develop that dog mentality, right? Pitching is, you got to have the utmost belief in yourself. Sorry, I have to throw every pitch. If it's 80 miles an hour, I have to think in my mind that pitch, that I have the utmost confidence in that 80-mile-an-hour fastball. Continue to build arm strength, build confidence, like make your strengths as strong as we can, develop the weaknesses. But like, if I want to be a dog and I want to be one of those guys, I cannot toe that rubber and have any fear in my mind, right? So I'm trying to get these guys fearless, throwing the baseball. Like, I can put fear into a hitter's head, but this thing should not put fear into my head as a pitcher. I just want them to be as competitive as possible, and no matter what stuff they have at that point in time, over time it's gonna develop. But we have to develop that dog mentality right from the jump. Like, I don't care if it's 75 or 85, we got to have the utmost belief in every pitch that we throw, and pitch and throw the baseball with conviction. I think that's where it starts, as the stuff comes and the stuff develops. And we put that work in, but I already have the mentality to compete and believe, and not get rattled by a hitter barreling a ball up. That's part of the game, right? That's all part of it. So on the pitching side of it, it's, developing the mentals and getting them to that dog mentality if they want to really be a dog, right?
Absolutely.
Understanding what they want, what that really looks like.
Starting shot, take us home here. I'm a parent of a 14 or 15-year-old kid who says that they want to be a Division I recruit. They want to be an absolute dog. How do I know if they're serious?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, work ethic, right? How well are you going to do in school? How well are you going to do at practice and on the field? But more importantly, are you going to get yourself a journal? And are you going to start journaling your calories? Are you going to start journaling your lift and your workouts? Are you going to journal your sleep? How much water you take in? What are you going to do to separate yourself from everybody else? Are you just going to do what everybody else does because you don't want to be elite? If you want to be great, you start at a very young age and you start figuring out the sport and you start mastering your craft. In order to master your craft, you got to get bigger, faster, stronger. In order to master your craft, you got to understand how the game is played and have a great baseball IQ. But then in order to really do it, you have to understand yourself. And that's where the journal comes in. So when you start learning about yourself, what makes you go, what makes you better, what makes you the best, then I think parents know that those kids are elite and they're ready to go. So I always wanted to be a professional athlete when I was growing up, and my sister was 2 years older than me, and her friends went out in high school every Saturday, every Friday night, and she asked me every Friday, every Saturday, and I said, "No, I'm not doing it. I'm staying here. I'm going to get a workout in. I'm going to get better. I have practice tomorrow." And so now as an old man, me and my sister have conversations, and she said, "I knew from the time you were 14 years old that you were going to be a professional athlete." I said, "How did you know that?" She said, "Because every time I tried to get you to go out with us, you said no."
To your point, and I'll piggyback off that to bring us to an end. Sports success is social sacrifice. That's a fact. That's an absolute fact. If you want to have any sort of a significant sports success, there will be a social sacrifice, among other sacrifices, but particularly a social sacrifice that comes with that. Gentlemen, thank
Yeah.
you very much for your time. Stu, I feel like I could talk about you picking dudes off left-handed all day. So I want
Yeah.
to see the
I mean,
instructional video. I got to see it from the side, bro.
Dude, Vargas hit me up earlier today saying he needed a pitching coach to come work with his guys. So, anytime, let's go.
Oh, man. Luke, appreciate it, buddy. Nino,
Appreciate it,
thank you
guys.
as always.
Thank you.
Good
Fantastic.
talking with you all.
All right, fellas. Have a good
I'm
evening.
going to start getting on for the next one tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to start working my camera so I can get on time. All right. See ya.
All right, see you, boys.
Later, guys. Good stuff, Tagg. Good stuff.